Welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics on an end-of-session broadcast. We are joined by the Toast of St. Louis, the founder of the Riverfront Times, the star of Donnybrook, Ray Hartmann. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Kelli Dunaway, running for St. Louis County Council, seeking the nomination, like you said. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
David Barklage, Dean of the Missouri Republican Party. Thank you, sir, for being here, sir.
Thank you.
Jay Kanzler, first time on the show, local attorney. And I think it's neat to note, radio show, KTRS, 9 to 11 here in St. Louis.
Ray Hartmann.
The Big 550. Now, what's it called?
St. Louis in the Know with Jay Kanzler and Ray
And you
Hartmann.
forgot to title one of the smartest Republicans.
That's right. That is a contest.
Isn't that an oxymoron?
Arguably is getting easier to win or tougher to win. I don't know.
Only the star of Donnybrook would say that.
David Barklage, as we're taping this show, the House is debating what many are calling a landmark anti-abortion bill. Basically, it's banning almost any way you could possibly think to ban an abortion without overturning Roe versus Wade, and saying if they do overturn Roe versus Wade, abortion is banned. It is a very aggressive policy. It is awakened passions on both sides of the aisle. The Senate made it through without PQing it, but the House is set up for a very historic day.
Well, I mean, two things. One is Elijah Har is the sort of key that shepherded it through is something very important to him. And to the extent that those people that support the bill, Elijah is clear force behind it. And then secondarily, the Senate leadership that was able to negotiate the bill to come up and to get a vote without a PQ. I think that says something about the lack of, or the bipartisanship in Jefferson City, that they take a much more sort of honest and less caustic approach to politics. But I think this bill is the second part of what you said. This is meant to challenge Roe v. Wade, and it is clearly constructed in such a way to give a challenge before the Supreme Court. And I believe there's very likely that this will be, of course, they'll probably join many of these recently bills passed to have that discussion. Where the Supreme Court goes, we don't know. I doubt this law will stand long. I'm sure it will be in federal court very quickly and be have a hold put on it. But from the standpoint, there's a lot of victories here for individuals who are trying to push it to have this challenge that people think and feel very strongly about.
Jay Kanzler, you're an attorney. This obviously was always going to go to the courts. I think that's what it was meant to be. Is this because Kavanaugh makes 5 theoretically pro-life justices?
Well, I think that's what people believe. And my experience in looking at the Supreme Court is that you cannot count on those votes. I think when the justices end up in Washington, D.C., they end up in that building, all of a sudden something takes over and they realize this is historic. I am part of something bigger than myself. And why they may have gone into the job thinking I'm this way or that way, or I will do this or that, I'll overturn Roe v. Wade, I won't. All of a sudden, with the colleagues that they're with, something happens, and we've seen it time and time again. I think for those people that think any of these bills coming out of any of the states around the country, and unfortunately I think we got one-upped by Alabama, but anybody that thinks they are going to overturn Roe v. Wade as opposed to maybe modify Roe v. Wade is going to be sadly disappointed.
Similar to Obamacare. I think a lot of folks thought Obamacare would be overturned, and Justice Roberts did not vote to overturn Obamacare.
And I think there's just something about the gravity of being a Supreme Court justice and realizing there is such a thing as precedent. There's something bigger than all of us with the Constitution, and you don't make wholesale changes. You use a scalpel, not a machete.
Kelli Dunaway, obviously, I think this arose a lot of passions on the pro-choice community. Jill Shute, probably the leading pro-choice senator in the state, lobbied, negotiated hours on hours on hours over weeks, but especially earlier this week. Where does the pro-choice community stand now with this probably going to be enacted?
Well, I actually think that this is going to further enrage women who are already angry. We're angry about the status that we're still fighting for control over our bodies in 2019. And I think for the pro-choice community, and certainly for me, this isn't about life. If this were about life, there would be far more access to education, real education. There would be more access to birth control. Women would have more paid parental leave. We would have access to early childhood education. There would be systems and policies in place to support women who decide to have a child. And that is not the case. We live in a state that has one of the highest infant mortality rates in the world, and the GOP refused to fund a study to find out why that is. So if this were about life, we would see much different policies coming out of the GOP. And I think for women and the pro-choice movement and Democrats in Missouri, I think this is really going to light an additional fire. And I do think that at the end of the day, you all are right. The Supreme Court is unlikely to overturn Roe versus Wade, and I think that this is going to end up blowing up in the faces of the GOP.
Ray Hartmann, it is always an interesting thing. You have folks in the media that see these bills and they're shocked, but if you watch a Republican state rep run for office in West Plains or Jefferson County, they run as unabashedly pro-life. They get to Jeff City and surprise, surprise, they vote for pro-life bills.
Well, there's two things. I agree, of course. I think the bill's wrong. I mean, on every level. It's well stated. I don't need to add to that. I mean, I do think that the fact that there's no exception for rape and incest is lethal politically, because if you start talking morality and you're some, God forbid, some teenage girl gets raped by a relative, or any woman gets raped, and you're telling that person they've got to bear the child of that rapist, that I don't think even in places that are pro-life, that message is going to resonate. And I think it brings us to the politics. I think this is dangerous politics for the Republicans for this reason. The genius of Ronald Reagan was that he was the first politician to run successfully on the subject of abortion, 1980, and he promised a constitutional amendment. But what the genius he had was he ran on it and ran on it and ran on it, but he didn't govern on it. He appointed Sandra Day O'Connor, a pro-choice Supreme Court justice. He never, even though he was a great communicator, didn't come close to pushing for a constitutional amendment after promising one. And for really, I know you have a theory that it's all such a pro-life state. If you look at it, Matt Blunt in 2004 is arguably the last authentically pro-life governor we've elected. I mean, you want to count Greitens, go ahead. But the fact is, this state is divided like most states are. And from a Republican standpoint, I don't think they want to poke this bear. I really don't politically.
I would add just one thing quickly. We, as a state, or even as a country, have always been Republican legislators versus the courts. It's always been, I think, those that have been pro-choice have relied upon the courts. As these bills start, I think what you're going to see is maybe some pushback in the Democratic Party, which is not always good for the Republicans, but I think things like initiative petitions, where people have never taken this issue kind of directly to the people, I just think the battleground's going to change, because as Republicans, they've been so successful in the legislature that people are going to change up how they approach it.
The last person that ran pro-choice for governor in was Bob Holden. Yep. Jay Nixon let those bills become law. He did not talk about abortion.
Look, I think it's fundamentally a gross overreaction to the fact what this is after so many years of Roe v. Wade, people on both sides want to test it. It was done in New York. Yep. It was done here. And so candidly, you can't really demagogue on either side. People who feel passionate about it want their chance with a new court to see where it's at, and they're testing it. And I think that's really what it's about, not about all these other issues coming to line.
It does have amazing emotion. This is the 10-year anniversary of one of the more explosive moments that I can remember in the legislatures, when Joan Bray stood up and said that told the Republican, her colleague, she was state senator, Joan, I think courageously, you can characterize it any way you want, told them that they were pro-life for themselves and pro-choice for their wives and their girlfriends. And it was not well appreciated moment, but it was rather historic.
May not appreciate it was well said. Jay Kanzler talk about the GM bill. There's a big plan in Wentzville. I know you're familiar with it.
Absolutely.
There was an incentive package that hit the legislature. You saw where it was a little bit odd. Republicans were saying development incentives were bad, while they probably have a Trump MAGA hat in their closet. It's a little bizarre, but you saw some of that. You saw some of the weirdo think tanks complaining. But at the end of the day, they were going to have these jobs, and it came as the governor, in a pretty good parliamentary trick, credit to Lincoln Huff from Springfield, put his workforce development initiatives in that bill, and it was opposed by folks from St. Charles County. They had them giving in. I think this is a huge win for the leadership in the Senate, a huge win for the House, huge win for the governor.
I think it was a huge win for the governor, those that supported it. I'm not quite sure that it's a huge win for Missouri, but this was one of those issues that there was no right answer. I'm reminded of Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men, where people, if he had not pushed this through and we'd lost GM, then what? When Jack Nicholson, you have that luxury. As the governor, he doesn't have the luxury of standing on principle alone. What this was a good day for, where everyone out there that's looking to say, I want tax credits, I want incentives, I want additional funding, because that's what we did. we picked a company, GM, and I think rightfully so, because, hey, one of my first real jobs in life was inside that plant, and I see what it's done for the community. On the other hand, where does it stop? And I think that's where some of the senators were saying, I'm just not comfortable with corporate welfare. They would never use that word, but incentives. We have better places to use our tax dollars. Would I have done it differently than what happened up there? No, because as an elected official, I don't have that luxury.
Ray, I mean, in dreamland, in fantasyland, in some think tank where people have very soft hands, you can come up with all these really ridiculous theories. In real life, you got jobs and you want to protect them, and the governor got it done.
Well, I'm not opposed to it. I think that I don't like corporate welfare, and I'm opposed to that, like most people are. The problem with that position in a context like this is you can't unilaterally disarm. It's a national thing. And so you're running into the fact that you could be as ideologically pure. And I believe the great Scott Faughn last week on this show made the point about Eigel and Onder and people like that, that if in a lot of counties, you wouldn't dare stand up against $50 million pouring into your own county, if I remember you saying that.
It wouldn't be the move for Mike Cunningham to go back to Webster County and
well, I'm not
get theoretical
in either,
about jobs.
believe me, I'm not in either one of their fan clubs. I have to say, in a way, I admire the fact that they were willing to oppose. You know, I don't know. You can tell me what the politics are of it, because I really don't know. In St. Charles County, it was a little surprising. You don't see very many people vote against $50 million of corporate welfare or whatever coming into their own county. I thought it was fascinating.
It's a choice where you have to, if you're gonna at the federal level outlaw subsidies, outlaw incentives, great. That's where the theoretical could actually be practical. In the real life, you want these jobs or you want them to go to Arkansas?
Yeah, the reality is that we're preserving the jobs we already have at the GM plant, where because Governor Parson was able to get his workforce development piece into the legislation, we're offering training and job skills training for a lot of people, $10 million worth, and I think that is a win for the area.
I like to be Mike Parson this week. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mike and his team got a big win. I think this comes down to, I think we all agree there has to be reform nationally, because I don't think anybody believes these tax credits really create jobs at the cost they do. But I am tired of hearing people say in the debate that let's quit picking losers and winners. Every time government spends a dollar or taxes a dollar, they're picking a winner, loser. But more importantly is, this is the difference you saw in the Senate and saw in the House, those that are theologians and those that are leaders. And the leader's the one that understood that this had to be done. The theologians who don't have the responsibility of governing are the ones that had all the quacking.
So the one thing I'd like to see come, and it won't necessarily come out of this, but because it's St. Charles County, when we define regionalism in St. Louis, we just had this big controversy with Better Together. It's not city and county. It's the 8-county area is our region. And if there were a way for the city and the county and St. Charles County and the other surrounding counties to have a truce among themselves and work together so that they weren't competing. This is not this case, I understand, but because you saw in St. Charles County the same feeling a lot of us have in the city and county, that corporate welfare, whatever you want to call it, is out of control. But we need some sort of, I think, regional approach that at least we're not fighting among ourselves with tax
people
credits.
From Eureka think they're from Eureka, but to the rest of us hillbillies, you're from St. Louis. Well, we have to be practical right now and take a break. Before we go, I want to tell you about SheltonMissouri.com. Go to Shelton, Missouri with an AH, like it's supposed to be said, as David knows. We interviewed Barry Horschel this week, talked about his career and his family history of Horschel Farm and Home. Go to SheltonMissouri.com. History of Missouri, one county, and this time one business at a time. Be right back after this.
For more than a century, the St. Louis Carpenters Union has shaped our communities. Through trusted alliances, we deliver skilled professional craftspeople, while our business partners provide the kind of quality jobs that keep our economy humming. It's a blueprint that has worked since 1882. Turning Missouri into a right-to-work state stalls progress, wipes out jobs, and kills momentum. Right to work is wrong for everyone. Let's keep Missouri moving forward. Visit carpdc.org to learn more.
All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads, because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, the heart of Missouri.
At Ameren, Missouri, we know what light can do. It draws people together and chases monsters away. And if you shine it in the right direction, it will light the path for the next generation, showing them what their tomorrow could look like, and spotlighting the possibilities that lay in front of them. Investing in our community by lighting the way forward. That's energy at work. Ameren, Missouri.
Welcome back to This Week in Missouri Politics. And one of the bigger headlines at the end of the session, it gets lost, but a friend of this show, Bruce Franks, is retiring from the House. David Barklage, you've been on the show with Bruce before. I was surprised, but I also, good for him. He resigned, he said, for mental health reasons. Got to take care of yourself, right?
I agree, and let me just tell you, in my entire life in politics, I don't know if I've met someone that is as rare as him, and I'll tell you why I think he's very unique, is that he, like many young blacks, have not had a lot of opportunity. He's had a lot of unfair things happen in his life, but he hasn't turned that to anger and hate, and I watched him, I've talked to him, and I was shocked at how he's turned that into a passion, and a creative passion, and exuberance that other people get the fact that his sincerity's there, and he's wanted to turn it to do good. And I'm telling you, in today's caustic political atmosphere, to have someone like that from that community is a rarity. And I think he's going to be sorely missed. And those that don't know him, hopefully he will come back and give an opportunity, because he was a rare leader.
I agree with that. I mean, I tell you what, the relationship I have with Bruce, there's jokes I don't laugh at anymore. There's things I say or say differently because he took the time to have a relationship with me and actually talk about issues that are uncomfortable, but from a friendship level. I have a lot of respect for the now former representative from St. Louis City.
No, it's not, you know him better than I do, and I admired him mostly from afar. Just we're on the same side, but as you make the point, it's really not about politics. He's really been an inspirational figure for a lot of people, and I just wish him well.
Jay Kanzler, I honestly think that Bruce Franks is in the phone of more Republican leaders than maybe anybody else outside of Jamil and Nasheed that I know of.
Well, he's in my phone, and as the attorney that was very active in Ferguson with all of the businesses up there, I dealt with Representative Franks and many of the other activists. And I will say I have respect for Representative Franks, and if I will take him at his word that it's about mental health and it's about family, and those are two things that are critically important, and anybody should be taking care of themselves and their family first above all things. With all the activists that I dealt with up there, not all of them were honest, not all of them were helpful, not all of them were particularly polite, to say the least. Bruce Franks was willing to have a conversation with me and the people that I was representing, and we were able to agree on things. Now, oftentimes that all blew up because the people around him couldn't stay focused, they always wanted to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, or defeat from the jaws of victory. Bruce Franks got it.
I do think it's a loss, not just to the St. Louis delegation, but to the state.
It is a loss. I mean, Bruce Franks was an inspirational figure. He empowered the people in a very downtrodden time in Ferguson, and he continues, in my view, he continues to lead by showing that he's putting his mental health and his family ahead of his political gain, and I think we should all be very supportive of him in this time of recovery.
So, David Barklage, Clean Missouri, I've gathered you have a couple opinions on it. There was a great move politically to couple redistricting reform with ethics reform. The Republicans came in, they said, let's go back to the ballot. It wasn't something that would move through the legislature. And said, do you really want the state auditor to be in charge of hiring the person to draw these districts? That seemed to be an honest mistake that kept it in fiscal review and didn't let it come to the floor. I was surprised they did abortion this year, and maybe they're going to try to do redistricting reform next year. You would think politically you'd switch those two.
Yeah, I don't, let's put in perspective is that we polled less than 15% of the voters even knew that redistricting was in there. And what it did is it took a bipartisan process that's been mirrored in, I think, 34 states and created a redistricting that was fair and turned it into a partisan process. And even the lobbying reforms has holes in it that unfortunately can be circumvented. So I think the fix to have a cleaner Missouri is what I would call it. It failed. Bill Eigel, who was busy debating blocking GM, failed to show up for a vote, and so did a couple of others, which is sad. But the fact is that I don't think it's dead. It has to come back. We can't allow a partisan system to determine our redistricting, because the plan that's there will create the most gerrymandered state in the continental United States and will put at risk potentially, depending on how the demographer reads the law, a lot of African American representation, as well as just it will cut communities apart.
There were other Republicans that didn't make it. Some have faulted the chairman for not getting this out of fiscal review. I think that Senator Rizzo and Najeeb were shocked that they were going to let him vote on this. I think they thought maybe a proxy worked, but as it ended up, it didn't come to the floor, and I think there's a lot of Republicans that were thinking we were going to take another bite at the apple here.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. The Republicans are in a difficult position because on the one hand, it passed overwhelmingly. Granted, hey, I'm someone who I think was beaten by a twice convicted felon in a statewide primary election. And so I like to think sometimes things slip through. But when the people overwhelmingly vote for something, you have to say, how do I then delicately explain to them that this is out there? And so it doesn't surprise me that it didn't happen this year. I think this has got to be a slower process because you can't just cut the legs out from underneath the folks and say, you didn't get it, you were too stupid to understand it. Truthfully, I think the process is flawed and it needs to change. It really raises the issue, I think, not for this show, but for another show of, is it time to curb or cut back on some of the initiative petitions that we have? We're turning into California when it comes to all of the initiative petitions, and somebody with enough money and with the written flair of a Ray Hartmann can get things passed that maybe shouldn't be.
First of all, I tried to tell Jay this. He ran against a convict. The guy was able to say, I have more conviction than Jay, and I think the voters, they took him literally. And I didn't know Jay back then, but I think that was I think they meant convictions. It didn't mean literally. I just look at the broader, and I think we should have a higher threshold than 50% to amend our Constitution. I think that's ridiculous, because I just think it's ridiculous. Having said that, there is a pattern here, and with all respect to whatever I'm sure you've got both parties' interests in mind when you're concerned about redistricting. There is the little detail that the voters did go to the polls and vote something called Clean Missouri, and one of the direct targets of their ire overwhelmingly across party lines was the state legislature. What are the lobbying practices? Were some of they called it Clean Missouri, and basically the ink wasn't dry before the Republicans decided that they wanted to come up with something called Not So Clean Missouri, and they started one thing after another as soon as they got there.
Cleaner Missouri.
No, they immediately, as they did with puppy mills and guns, they said, well, that's great that the voters voted, but here's what the voters really meant. And the thing that set this apart,
punish them for guns and puppy mills?
The thing that set this apart was that this was targeted, this was being undone in the legislature. I'm not even talking about redistricting. When they were talking about open sunshine laws and open meetings and lobbies, they were undoing things before the ink was dry. That was targeted by the voters at them.
But that wasn't in the fix. It was in the discussion, and if I wanted to hold accountable the progressives for all the discussion that they're having, you would balk as well. So that was just part of the discussion.
And I don't disagree with
the fact is there wasn't a commercial.
Right.
You and I know from a practical political discussion
Why wasn't there?
that Clean Missouri was about hiding the reforms around a redistricting effort. That's what it was about. I mean, it is what it is.
Would have done from the other side.
Exactly.
It was very well done.
They did a great job.
But the
But that's
point
the
is,
truth.
the voters
That's the
voted
truth.
for it. Is it like Does it even matter on a scale of 0 to 100?
So wait,
what percentage
by
does
that
it matter
same
that the
deal,
voters passed it?
The voters voting for gambling,
Right.
for Prop C on education, we voted for it. So the fact that they took the money and shifted elsewhere, well, we can't complain because that's what it said.
Voters voted against Obamacare.
Or the gambling casinos. It's to go to education.
I'm
Oh
saying-
no, it gets pushed.
The targets of
That's your
Clean
argument.
Missouri.
That's your
my
argument.
point is this: I don't even care. As I say, I really haven't paid a lot of attention to the details of the redistricting. But the idea that the voters said we want clean Missouri because of you, and they were pointing at the political class,
At the
both parties,
legislature.
and
right.
the political class says,
I
no,
hate
you
to have
don't.
to put the gas on Ray, but for Kelli, do you not think if you're a Republican in Illinois, you love the initiative petition process? If you're a Democrat in Missouri, you love it because you can't win elections in the state legislature, so you have to go to the process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and Ray's right. The voters overwhelmingly voted for Clean Missouri because they don't like the way the state legislature is doing its business. And I think that to continue
they
this
keep electing
conversation,
supermajorities of the same party every time they vote.
and I think that's a
But
very
that's not
good
actually true
point.
because polling shows that the legislature, actually a majority of Missourians support what the legislature is doing, both Democrat and Republican. It is more about the fact that they wanted to reform. They didn't like the lobbyist gifts
Right. That's
and other rules.
Right.
And look,
Money
I
in
believe in
politics.
initiative petitions because ethics would have never been passed. Term limits, some of these things, right or wrong, would never have been passed without it. But I do agree the constitutional threshold, and Ray, you know, I talked about it, that needs to be raised because in like the Better Together situation, if there would have been one small conflict in there, it would have been almost impossible to amend.
Exactly. And I'm not talking about all propositions. I'm talking
Right.
about constitutional amendments. There's a difference.
But I like letting people speak.
One of the ironies about the whole Clean Missouri is I worked for a Republican governor named Kit Bond, and I think 1973, Bond, as a moderate Republican, working with a Democratic legislature, probably accomplished more in 1 year in ethics. The Sunshine Law, all kinds of.
Well, we've accomplished all we can accomplish here today.
And today's party wants to undo all of it.
With a minute left, Ray, who won the week?
I think the pro-choice movement. I really do. I think opening this as a live political issue is not going to serve the interests of the Republican Party in 2020.
Kelli, who won the week?
I'm going to focus on who lost the week. I think that Missouri women lost the week, and we should have control over what happens to our bodies.
David Barklage, who won the week?
The only way I can do it is show it, and that is Bruce Franks, and this is to him.
I like it. Jay Kanzler, who won the week?
Probably GM and those that would like to see economic development funded through Jefferson City.
I'm going to say the House Speaker Elijah Har and Missouri Right to Life. Missouri Right to Life has been active in the state for a very long time. Huge week for them and the Speaker of the House that led the fight to passing the biggest abortion bill of all time. Love it or hate it, right? Well, we'll come back. We'll be off next week from All Day Week. We'll be back in 2 weeks on This Week in Missouri Politics.
This Week in Missouri Politics, sponsored by the Missouri Association of Career Fire Protection Districts, Spire, and Sterling Bank.